This screencast is on Andrew Marvell and his poem To His Coy Mistress. I suppose that the best place to start would be that word coy. According to the OED, coy meant in Marvell's day pretty much the same thing that it means now. Quote, to affect reserve, shyness, or disdain. And affecting means to pretend. So, in other words, to pretend to be shy or reserved when you're really not. So, already, right here in the title, there's a judgment about the woman. Before we get to the poem, though, let's get to know a little more about the poet Andrew Marvell. He was the son of a minister in the Church of England. While he was in college, he ran off to London and converted to Catholicism, but his father made him give up both London and the Catholic Church to get back to school. So he earned his degree from Cambridge in 1639 at the age of 18. Around 1650, Marvell served as tutor to Oliver Cromwell's ward, while Cromwell was Lord Protector of Britain. In 1657, Marvell met John Milton and served as his personal secretary in Milton's position as Secretary for Foreign Tongues in Cromwell's Council of State. We'll hear more about his relationship with Milton when we read the first two chapters of Paradise Lost. Marvell didn't publish any of his poems during his lifetime. Rumor has it that a woman who claimed to be his widow, but who was more likely his housekeeper, collected all of his poems after his death and had them published, 30 years or so after he had written them. Let's take a look at Marvell's poem, To His Coy Mistress, on pages 677 and 678 of your book. Like Donne's poetry, this is a metaphysical poem. So then what two things would we expect to find in it? Naturally, a conceit and a paradox. We'll see if we can find them in this text. What is he saying in the first 10 lines of the poem? Think about how you would translate this into plain English. Had we but whirled enough in time, this coyness lady were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find. I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. If you had to write what he is saying here in just one or two sentences, what would you say? I think my interpretation would be something like, if we had enough time, we'd walk from India, where you'd collect some rubies, then we'd walk back to the Humber River in England, where I would write love poems. I would have started loving you 10 years before Noah's flood, and you could refuse me until Judgment Day. We then come to that strange reference to vegetable love. Why would he compare his love to a vegetable? Do you smell a conceit here? Because you certainly should. Think about how a vegetable grows, and then think of love in those terms to see what the conceit is telling us. He says, 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and on thy forehead gaze, 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest, an age at least to every part, and the last age would show your heart. For lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. In other words, I'd be perfectly happy to spend hundreds of thousands of years admiring every part of you. But then we come to that big word, but. But at my back I always hear Time's winged chariot hurrying near. He'd do all of these things if he just had time, but he always hears it chasing him. He reminds her that it's chasing her too. And yonder all above us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long preserved virginity. And your quaint honor turn to dust, and into the ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. Her beauty isn't going to last forever. And as for her virginity, well, what good is it to her if she waits too long and dies a virgin? Then only the worms will get to enjoy her body. The poem ends. Now, therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour than languish in his slow chapped power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still, yet we can make him run. Here he is saying that we have to do this while we're young, while we still have time. And if we don't, we may never get the chance. In other words, seize the day. This is what's known as a carpe diem poem, urging action today because tomorrow may be too late. How persuasive is the young lover being with his argument? Would you imagine that she'll give in to him? Compare this to Donne's Flea. Which is more persuasive, do you think? So we found the conceit in this poem, even though it's not extended very far. What about the paradox? Naturally, it has to do with sex, but what is it here? Take another look at lines 25 through 29. They should give you a clue. So, had we but whirled enough in time, there's so much more that we could discuss. But I hear that winged chariot at my back. Thanks, and I hope this helps you better understand Marvel's coy mistress.